Welcome, everyone. This is Think Tech Hawaii's live webinar, Burning National Issues, Legal Chicken and Legal Egg. And I'm your moderator, Avi Soifer. I will try to be a genial moderator. I don't know about a moderate moderator, but here we are. We have a terrific group of panelists and an issue or a series of issues that, if anything, have become more burning since this was put together with a lot of work by a lot of people. I guess both eggs and chickens are better fried, not burnt. But these issues are questions about which comes first, of course, that's the implication of the title, but also issues where we are worried about walking on eggshells, and we're not going to do that at all in this program. And finally, we do want to get to the other side or the other sides. So think about those chickens and eggs, but we have a lot of other things to think about. And this is an interactive program, and so you will have occasion to ask questions if you wish. There's closed captioning available for those who would like that as well. And it is my great pleasure, truly, and an honor to introduce our panelists. Kimi Ide-Foster is a partner in the law firm of Chun Kerr, former president of the Hawaii Women Lawyers, and active with Planned Parenthood. Chris Marvin is a former Army helicopter wounded veteran who has his own consulting practice dealing with veterans affairs, but is very active in the gun safety area and representing Everytown for gun safety. Richard Walsgrove, I'm proud to call my colleague at the William S. Richardson School of Law, where he is co-director of the Environmental Law Program. He was previously policy director for Blue Planet Foundation. Sylvia Albert is a great expert on voting rights and voting issues, and she is director of voting and elections for Common Cause. She presses for reforms that expand access to the ballot and promote fair voting and representation. And finally, Jay Fidel, a character, as many of you know, retired attorney, CEO, and founder of Think Tech Hawaii, and he has covered a wide variety of topics: history, technology, culture, and the news. Welcome, panelists. Welcome all of you who are tuning in. Here's the format for today. Each speaker will have 4 to 5 minutes to speak about critical issues regarding their topics, and then we will have time for questions from the other panelists, maybe from me, and also we'll be gathering them from those of you who are tuning into this. This is a live program, so send in your questions, please, through the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll get in as many as possible, and they're an important part of this program. And of course, questions make it more lively, and I'm sure the answers are going to provoke yet more questions. We don't have time for all of that, but each panelist, after they have the question and answer period, are going to have a couple of minutes to kind of reflect on what has been said, maybe what hasn't been said, and then we're going to have a summary with observations, integration, if it's possible, of these very important issues. As soon as the program ends and you leave, there's going to be a survey on your screen. We appreciate if you would take a minute, really just a very short time, to give your feedback on the program. Thank you, and let's get started. Our first panelist is Kimi Ide-Foster, who comes from downtown Honolulu, and she's going to talk about abortion in America. Kimi, a lot going on in that area. What are your current observations in just a few minutes, please?
Thank you, Avi. I really appreciate that. And thank you guys for having me. This is exciting. I wish it was a little bit less exciting, maybe, but there is a lot going on. So I think most people are aware that when the Dobbs decision came down in June, late June of this year, 13 states went dark almost immediately. And when we say going dark, we talk about that means that abortion access has either been completely restricted or down to something like 6 weeks, which most women in the audience realize you don't even know you're pregnant at 6 weeks. We have had some occasional victories. An Indiana judge recently issued a preliminary injunction pausing Indiana's near total abortion ban. There have been amazing stories. In Idaho right now, there is a coalition of volunteer pilots that are flying patients to other states. And that's amazing, but it's absolutely crazy that we have to do things like this. Like, you should not have to have a contingency of pilots ready to take you to a different state. We've obviously also had some nasty setbacks. Texas is the obvious one that most people are aware of, but last week, Arizona put a ban from 1901 into effect, where there are no exceptions for rape or incest. The biggest effect that we're seeing Dobbs have, though, on kind of the national conversation is it's just causing mass confusion, which is something that the anti-choice side definitely wants to happen because they've left it up to the states and state law because there are things like injunctions, it's jumping back and forth, it changes almost on a week to week basis. And these patients, I mean, they're already going through a really hard time. They're already confused. And unfortunately, the people that are the most affected by things like this are going to be Black and Brown minorities who are already suffering from marginalization and a lack of real information. So it's a mess all around. Um, that's kind of like the overall broad national view. And Avi, I know you have some questions for me, but I do want to take this time to ask people that if you are pro choice, to please look into the Protect Kentucky Access campaign. It's a really, really critical time for Kentucky right now. They are facing a ballot initiative that, if it's approved by voters, will put it one step closer to a total ban in the state. Um, and we do think that there is a very high likelihood of success in this campaign. It's being run by the same woman who ran the Kansas campaign. And our early polls show that up to 80% of voters do not want the total ban. Even the pro, quote unquote, pro life, I don't like using that phrase, think that this goes too far. So if you have a minute, please check out Protect Kentucky Access.
So, Kimi, many of us think there are things wrong with the opinion of the Supreme Court, written by Justice Alito. If we had all of this time, we might cover most of them. But one of the key arguments that he makes, that the majority of the court makes, is, well, this is really all about federalism. Let's just leave it to the states. We have different views in this country. Federalism is a strong strand in our tradition. What about the federalism part of this, the positive side of what you just described?
One, I disagree, obviously, with the opinion on a number of points. We've had this discussion, Avi, in the past, and I understand that you feel the same way in a lot of respects. First and foremost, that if you're talking about federalism, federal society, and respecting the courts too, it was settled law. The opinion overturned numerous points of settled law. So this whole, well, let's just leave it to the states thing, it's a little bit like you're picking and choosing which parts of the judicial system, which parts of the kind of overall governmental system that you want to support, which also was very, very indicative of the opinion. I think a lot of people have pointed out that you're going back on a whole privacy line of cases. People are saying you're coming for gay marriage next. And it was very interesting that in Thomas's concurrence, the one line of case that he left out was Loving v. Virginia, probably because it personally affects him. So I don't think that the whole federalist argument, and let's leave it to the states, I don't think that it holds water here. I also don't think that and I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but I don't think that when there is an issue that is this critical and that puts this many people's lives in danger, I don't think it should be left up to a ballot box. This is crazy.
So my last question, which I guess is in two parts, is that Justice Alito says that the Roe versus Wade decision and some of the other privacy decisions were egregiously wrong. And they were egregiously wrong because of a little part of constitutional law, which is called substance due process, putting some substance together with the procedural protections of the 14th Amendment. He doesn't say we would never use it, but he says it has to be based on deeply rooted traditions. And I guess one of the thoughts I have is some of our deeply rooted traditions are not what we want to celebrate, like gender discrimination, racism, and so on. What about that? That the court is kind of not bound by the text, they're making it up, and they're going to make it up in various ways that may or may not be acceptable.
You hit one of the points of the opinion that just puts steam out of my ears. Um, just the very line that it's not rooted in American tradition. One, the American tradition that he was talking about did not include women. It did not include people of color. It didn't include anybody who wasn't really a white landowner. And no offense to my colleagues on this panel who are white males, that's pretty much the only people that they were talking about. And the other thing is that he also refers to a line of cases, I believe, from England, Bobby,
Yes.
which was written by a judge who also believed in witch hunting, actual witch hunting. So this is, I just the whole, we can't do things that are breaking from American tradition. To me, one, that just doesn't make sense from a practical standpoint. If you never believed in change or moving things forward, we would all still be driving horses and buggies. That's just not a great way to go about the world. The second thing is that I believe the Constitution and Texas and the law is evolving. It's a living creature. You cannot put the same standards in place now that you had in the 1800s. The world is not the same. The people aren't the same. The demographics aren't the same. And the law has to keep pace with the real world. So saying something that is not grounded in deeply rooted American traditions or values, when those traditions and values no longer fit society, I think that's egregious.
One of our panelists asked whether reconfiguring the court may be the best or maybe the only solution to where the current court is on matters such as DOMS, such as the abortion decision. What do you think about that?
Jay and I have had this discussion before, and I do think that that's a huge part of it. The downside to that is that, you know, if we have another president like President Trump and he packs the court, or or they get it through the Senate where they can add more justices, I I don't know if that's the permanent long term solution. But the current court, which I think is what you're asking me about, yes, the current court is a disaster, and I think there are at least two or three justices on there that have no business sitting on the highest court in the land. I mean, there's at least one on there who has the trial experience of a third or fourth year associate. So I think, I think that's where I stand on that.
Another panelist question, and then we'll unfortunately have to go on because we don't have time for everybody. But is there another question from any of you? Richard, please.
Thank you, Kimmy. One of the things that I'm thinking about a lot these days is the rights of future generations. This comes up a ton in the environmental context. And I'm struggling to understand how we could reconcile a legal system that would say future generations don't have any rights in the environmental context, but we're hell bent for leather on protecting those rights of future children in this reproductive freedom context. I mean, am I missing something there? I guess is my question.
I mean, no, I don't think you're missing anything there. I think it kind of goes to the whole point. Then I'm sure you guys have heard. Um, some people say that this actually has very little to do with protecting the rights and lives of the next generation of children. This has everything to do with control. It doesn't have, I mean, if you were really and truly, quote unquote, pro life and you're worried about the next generation of children, you would be investing in social services, you would be investing in maternal health, you'd be investing in mental health, you would be looking into the school system. Like that's how you protect the next generation. This reproductive debate, I don't want to call it debate, but this reproductive assault has nothing to do with that. Um, I think, and this might be a little bit of a cynical, dark way to look at this, but this has a lot more to do with pushing women, and especially women of color, back down into the community. If they are so worried about getting pregnant and having 6, 7, 8 kids, you're eliminating an entire voice. And then there are some states, like I think it's Texas, where abortion is about to or is already a felony, and felons can't vote. So you are taking something and you are creating a system of control to push people back down to where you think they belong. And that's what I think it's about. I don't think it's about protecting future generations at all.
I hope not to invoke the moderator's prerogative after each discussion, but one ought to take a look at the district court judge's opinion in Dobbs, where he goes into some detail about what Mississippi is and is not doing for children. Very impressive Black judge. So I commend that to all of you. We have to go on, however, and next we are really going to be very pleased. You will be pleased to hear Chris Marvin. I can tell you he is terrific on this and other subjects, and he's going to talk about gun violence in America. And Chris, there's too much to talk about that topic too, and on a daily basis there are shocking developments. Please share a few key points at the beginning.
Well, I mean, I would immediately add to the list that Kimmy's just made about sort of the hypocrisy of the so-called pro-life movement, because many of those people are also anti-gun violence, right? Or sorry, anti-gun violence prevention. They want to have guns. They want to be able to shoot people that come into their homes. That's not preserving life from conception to natural death, nor is favoring the death penalty. And so, lots of hypocrisy that affects our issues as they sort of cross over. But gun violence in and of itself is an epidemic in America. 40,000 deaths annually. Now we've eclipsed the 40,000 mark. and almost twice that are wounded by guns. That's a 33% increase in gun violence in the United States from 2011 to 2020, right? So just in a decade, we have a third more gun deaths. And it costs Americans. It costs Americans about $500 million a year. A decent chunk of that comes from taxpayers, but it costs our country enormously. Excuse me, I believe I said it's $500 billion a year, $500 billion a year. The thing that really comes up with gun violence is that we talk about it a lot when there's a mass shooting or a school shooting. People are surprised to find that about 0.3% of gun deaths in this country are mass shootings. It's a very small portion. It's not that they're not horrific, and they certainly do drive change and they drive conversation, but it's only 0.3%. Police shootings are actually more frequent than that. So 1% of gun violence, 38% of gun violence is homicides, but 60% of gun violence in this country is suicide. Right. So the upshot here is that by having easy access to guns, we're giving people the ability to kill other people and themselves, and they're doing it effectively. We have a rate of homicide, of gun homicide in the United States is 26 times greater than our peer countries. Think about that for a second. And you have one side of this debate who's saying, well, actually it's mental illness, or it's domestic violence, or it's video games, or it's this sort of even the hate-filled ideologies that we know are prevalent in this country. Guess what? All of our peer countries have that to some degree. They have all of those things. What they don't have is easy access to guns, which is why we have such a crazy rate of gun homicides. The mass shootings, then, they do bring up some debate. They get us talking about the things that we could do better. This summer, the Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which did enhance background checks, gave some money for red flag laws. Those are both two major things that we could do. It closed the boyfriend loophole, which is a very important one, because you were prohibited from owning a gun if you were a domestic abuser to your spouse, but not if you were a domestic abuser to your girlfriend. So we closed that loophole, and did some other things, especially money for community-based violence intervention, which is also very important. But it didn't do much for states like Hawaii, right? It didn't do much for states that already had good gun laws, because we had those laws at the state level for the most part. Some of the federal money in infusion may be helpful, but other than that, we kind of had already covered ourselves. But great, it covers down for other states, because the issue with gun reform in the United States is that if Illinois passes great gun laws, Indiana screws them over because they have horrible gun laws, right? And people just drive. There's nothing that's stopping someone from buying a gun in Indiana and driving into Illinois and shooting somebody. And so you hear a lot about Chicago and the gun violence there, and that is a result of sort of those porous borders. It also makes Hawaii a very interesting candidate to be sort of a petri dish on gun violence prevention, because we don't have the terrestrial border that allows people to drive guns in, and we do have good gun laws. I'll close by saying that also the Supreme Court is impacting what is happening in Hawaii here. The Bruin decision that came out the same week as the decision on abortion said that for someone to obtain a concealed carry permit in Hawaii and other states, New York and some others, they needed to show proper cause. The Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. And now Hawaii has to change the way that we issue our concealed carry permits. For the most part, Hawaii was a state where nobody was walking around with guns. We just had legislated that away. And now that will change. And that's happening literally today and next week. The sheriff's rules in Honolulu County will change next week for getting a concealed carry permit. And the front page of the Star Advertiser today talked about the Mayor Blangiardi's proposal to create sensitive places legislation as a city ordinance, which is going to be crucially important to know where you can't have guns if we have people walking around with guns. So this stuff, has been a blight on America writ large, and it's coming here to our islands as well.
So it was those two decisions, Dobbs and the New York gun case, were a day apart, and very far apart in terms of the importance of history, because New York statute, like ours, goes back many, many years. And that didn't seem to matter to the court at all. So on the one hand, tradition and history and text, and on the other hand, not so much. But they left some openings, didn't they? I mean, in some ways, it's not quite as troublesome, at least as the Dobbs decision seems to be, where we are one of 6 states, with 5 in D.C., that are directly affected. So, what about the possibilities? A little optimism here, maybe, that there will be further regulations in places like Hawaii as well as on the national front?
There's two ways to look at it. I think one is that a place like Hawaii was unprepared for this. We're unprepared for having guns on our streets legally carried by individuals, whether they're whether they're responsible gun owners or not. I think people remember maybe a month or so ago there was a guy who had a gun in Waikiki, and it just caused the beach to evacuate like there was a mass shooting happening, and we're really not sure what was happening there. The lifeguards stepped in, the police stepped in. What's going to happen when we're not used to culturally seeing a pistol on someone's hip in a grocery store, right? So it gives us an opportunity to catch up and make legislation around sensitive places, and to make it really good legislation. If you read what Mayor Blangiardi has proposed, it's pretty good legislation. It actually creates a default that businesses do not allow guns, right? So for private businesses and for charitable organizations, the default is they don't. So if you want to allow guns in your shop, or your place of business, and you have to put up a sign that says guns are allowed, as opposed to the opposite. So we're still defaulting to common sense, which is great. That's legislation that I think could be mirrored in other parts of the country. So again, Hawaii is a petri dish. Likewise, the sheriffs and the county officials in Maui and Hawaii County have already put into place the laws that will clarify who can get a concealed carry permit, and it's a high standard, as it should be, right? And so making sure that people don't have mental health deficiencies, making sure that people are trained on the weapons that they're going to be carrying. And Honolulu County is there's a hearing next Tuesday to put that into place for Honolulu County. At Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, we support what the county is doing. And I will say, for those of you listening today that do support that, email HPD and let them know. It's a really simple email address. It's HPDLTC, stands for License to Carry, HPDLTC@honolulu.gov. Just jump on your email right now and send them an email that says we support the concealed carry laws that are going to go into effect. It'll keep us safer.
One last question. One of the attendees asks whether there's any chance of the sort of mandatory buyback, as in New Zealand and Australia. Can you see Hawaii doing something like that?
I don't see that happening anywhere anytime soon. This gun debate writ large is pretty askew right now, because the one side of the argument is the far extreme right view, which is the gun lobby's opinion, which is all guns everywhere, all the time, for anybody, no exceptions, and quickly, right? That's just, if you look at anything the NRA or the gun lobby says, that's just what they're trying to do. Those of us trying to promote gun safety are just saying, could we have background checks on those gun sales? Like, could we do that? 95% of Americans agree with background checks on all gun sales. What else do 95% of Americans agree with? I don't know. Pizza's delicious, right? Like 95% of Americans agree, yet Congress won't pass it. There's not a Republican senator who doesn't have a constituency that the majority supports background checks on all gun sales, including gun sales online and gun sales at gun shows. But none of those senators will vote for it because they're beholden to the gun lobby. It's even 85% of gun owners and 75% of NRA members. So what we really see there is a fundamental failure of representative democracy. The people are not getting what the people want from the people who they have elected to represent them in the Congress, specifically in the Senate at this moment. And I think that those are the fights we're going to have to fight right now. Gun buybacks, if you're in favor of those, would be well beyond that. So we're just focused on saving lives in the meantime, and really saving lives while being really respectful of the fact that there are hundreds of thousands or millions of responsible gun owners out there, right? I come from a military background, and a lot of the people that I work with on gun safety are gun owners and gun collectors, and they're just as keen about having good gun safety laws as anybody else.
Thank you, Chris. And Chris and Kimi have gotten us off to a terrific start. So there's a lot of pressure, Richard, but I've seen him stand up to pressure eloquently before. Richard Walsgrove is our next speaker. He's going to talk about climate change. Richard.
Thanks very much, Avi, and thanks, Kimi and Marvin, for helping to educate me. What a difficult set of topics. And as I started to think about the legal chicken and legal egg, my first question was, well, what does climate change have to do with things like preventing gun violence and protecting reproductive freedom and ensuring that everybody gets the right to vote? And I thought that was going to be a difficult task. And it turns out it wasn't so hard. I flipped open the first case I thought to look at to prepare here was a case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on the Juliana plaintiffs. This is the group of children who filed claims against the US government, alleging that they had a right to a stable climate that promoted, their ability to live in the future. It was couched as a right to a free and ordered society. And so I flipped open that decision and I found the opinion of Judge Staten. And you'll have to forgive me, I never do this, but I feel like I just have to read these words because they drive home the message so clearly. In these proceedings, the government accepts as fact that the United States has reached a tipping point, crying out for a concerted response, yet presses ahead toward calamity. It is as if an asteroid were barreling toward Earth and the government decided to shut down our only defenses. Seeking to quash this suit, the government bluntly insists that it has absolute and unreviewable power to destroy the nation. And of course, Judge Staten's not making that up. She cites evidence that the absent immediate action, an inhospitable future awaits, marked by sea level rise, losing coastal cities, we're seeing that today, mass migration, resource wars, food shortages, heat waves, megastorms, soil depletion, freshwater shortage, collapsing public health system, and the extinction of an increasing number of species. Judge Staten's words based on the evidence before her, not mine. So there you go. There's one way in which I think these issues are tied together. Climate change is what we call a threat multiplier. We've seen recently what happens when you stress our public health system and how that can have spillover effects into other parts of our society. Climate change threatens to do that, but it's not just the public health system, right? It's our food system and our public health system and our social systems and et cetera, et cetera. So on the facts, I see a relation, but I've also realized reading Judge Staten's decision that there's a legal connection between all of these issues. And she wrote it right out for me. Here it goes. She characterizes this right to a free and ordered society as a corollary to a stable climate. She characterized it as a fundamental right, like the right to marry, the right to raise children, to avoid involuntary servitude, and right at the core of Judge Staten's analysis, she compares this to the right to vote. That basically these are the rights that undergird all of the other freedoms and benefits we get as being part of this society. So Staten's smarter than I am. She figured this out before I started thinking about it. But I have some bad news to share, and that's that she was writing the dissenting opinion in that decision. And the majority decided that it went the other way. They decided the children probably would be able to prove they had been injured. They could probably trace those injuries back to the federal government's actions, but the court decided there's no way for the judiciary to redress these injuries. And here is where I'm seeing a troubling trend that is a legal chicken egg problem I don't know how to solve. And that trend is we've got a judiciary who's abdicating their responsibility to take on big issues. Essentially, the roadmap that is laid out here, they actually cite, this will interest Sylvia, the majority cited the Rucho v. Common Cause case to say, this is such a big question, only the political branch of government can address it. And in fact, there's a line, it's one of the silliest lines I've ever seen in opinion. It says, if you want to fix this problem, go to the ballot box. The court said this to children who aren't yet 18 and can't vote. Looking aside the fact that there are a lot of questions about the right to vote going forward. This isn't just the one case, for what it's worth. The West Virginia v. EPA case, which came out over the summer, essentially used the same reasoning, just with a different legal doctrine. Somehow they decided that a defunct EPA rule called the Clean Power Plan that the EPA had withdrawn, and that at its core actually only required coal power plants to pay some amount to offset their emissions, was such a hugely major question, because it affects our energy system, that the courts have no role in it. And so there's my legal chicken and legal egg. I'm thinking of this as sort of, when you push on one part of our legal system, how do the other parts respond? What I'm seeing is this trend in which the court decide that they don't have a role in protecting on big issues, which allows the issues to get bigger, which forces people to go back to the courts and say, hey, my rights are being violated here. And now an even bigger problem, of course, if your logic is going to be consistent, would say the courts can't step into it. I'm troubled. I'm not walking on eggshells today, Avi. I'm usually a little bit calmer than this, but these issues are just getting me so fired up. I can't deal with a judiciary that says we can't tackle big problems. I think of Brown v. Board of Education, and I say that's nonsense.
So it struck me in thinking about that EPA case for the end of the term that one of the things the current court is doing in order to pretend, at least, to have the pretense of being textualists is to say, yeah, but there's this other doctrine. There's this major question doctrine, which of course is not in the Constitution. And then they invent something like that, and eyes glaze over as they then develop that over the years. And I think this is not the only area where that's happening. But one of the things I've heard you talk about in the past is a response to eyes glazing over. So people say, oh, who knows about carbon capture? It's complicated and we keep hearing about it. What do you say to that? That people, science is too complicated, these problems are too big. And I've heard you respond to that. And I wonder if you have more or different things to say, but I think you've been terrific on this question.
It depends on the day of the week how I respond to that. In part, I'd say in 2022, the science is no longer that complicated. You only have to flip open the front page to hear that we know what's going to happen. The government's own attorneys, the government was challenging the children's rights in the Giuliani case. The government's own experts acknowledge catastrophic climate change will happen absent immediate action. So I don't think it's any longer this complicated scientific issue. I also think the courts are fully competent of addressing complicated scientific issues. That's exactly what the trial court is designed to do. And the trial court in the Giuliani case said, wow, this is pretty important evidence. In another climate case in San Francisco, the judge decided to go ahead and put on an evidentiary hearing and have both sides present the evidence. And lo and behold, the oil company defendants in those cases didn't challenge the science of climate change. So I don't think it's a challenging technical issue. And Avi, where I think you might be headed is that what we've got perhaps is a messaging issue, a communication issue. That for too long we've allowed industrial interests to change the story about climate change and to make it sound like this complicated and uncertain task. And we're lifting the covers off of that nonsense too. The discovery that's happening in climate litigation at the trial court level, before these cases get tossed at the appellate court level, the discovery is showing that there was this intentional campaign to deceive all of us and make us believe that this issue is intractable.
1 minute left, I guess. One of the things coming in is, what about impeachment for district court judges, circuit court judges, and maybe even the U.S. Supreme Court justice?
I read yesterday about Justice Alito's, quote about it crosses a line when you question the legitimacy or the integrity of judges. And so I decided not to go there, even though I was pretty fired up. And there you go, Avi. You asked me the question, what about impeachment? I don't know that I have an answer on impeachment specifically, but I will say that if we're trying to tie all this up and think again, how are these issues all together? That this troubling trend of abdicating a judicial role and answering big questions only erodes the legitimacy of a court. Looking aside who a particular judge or justice might be, if our political branch of government isn't solving problems, and the court has told our executive branch in West Virginia v. EPA that they're not allowed to solve the problem, if the courts then abdicate a role as well, I'm sorry, Justice Alito, the perception of the court's legitimacy is being eroded. And we know that perception is the whole game. It says that right in the judicial code of conduct. So that's my answer on that one, is that while I don't know we're in the business of attacking individual judges, this legal thinking, this reasoning, should be attacked not just on its merits, but I think attacked on its fundamental role in protecting our society.
Thank you. So Sylvia, from the frying pan into the fire, what about voting rights?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thanks to my panelists for teaching me more that I didn't want to know maybe this this evening. So not surprisingly, what we are seeing is a drastic erosion of federal protections for voting rights. This is occurring in a variety of different ways, including, as my panelists referred to, through the Common Cause v. Rucho decision and through continued erosion of the Voting Rights Act. So the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 to ensure that state and local governments didn't pass policies or laws that deny Americans the right to vote. And one of the most powerful parts of the Voting Rights Act was Section 5. And that required that places with a history of discrimination had to get approval before they made any changes to their voting laws. That was struck down in 2013 by the Supreme Court. And immediately following that, we saw a number of states pass restrictive voting laws that had already been denied. They had previously asked for approval, and that approval was denied because it was found that those laws would have a discriminatory effect. So that was in 2013. In 2016, we had Common Cause v. Rucho, where the court basically abdicated its responsibility and found that partisan gerrymandering was just not non-judiciable, which I think is a ridiculous word. Basically, right, like my fellow panelists said, they said, go to the ballot box. Well, here's the problem. By getting rid of the federal protections for people's right to vote, states have enacted restrictive laws that take away people's right to representation. So when you go to the ballot box, maybe you're not going to be able to vote, or maybe the lines were gerrymandered to such an extent that your voice isn't being heard. And we're absolutely seeing that in the other areas that we've talked about today. The majority of Americans don't want an abortion ban. The majority of Americans want background checks. The majority of Americans don't want to watch the country burn. But because we now have a system where people are not being represented properly, because the system itself has been so perverted, we're just getting to the point where we're not being represented in any way by either our elected officials or the judges that have been appointed by those elected officials who, again, did not get more votes than others. So I do want to highlight the Supreme Court term that's going to start next month could be even more devastating for voting rights. Particularly, there's a case called Moore v. Harper, and that's a North Carolina redistricting case. And the lawmakers in North Carolina are arguing basically that state legislatures should have absolute power to run federal elections with no checks and balances from the courts. And that is a dangerous and, desperate precedent, and would be, again, reversing centuries of practice, including decisions that the Supreme Court just made. So, I mean, such a dangerous decision really would just open us up to even further erosion of our rights at the state and federal level. It would probably lead to widespread voter purges, discriminative policies being passed, cuts to early voting and vote by mail, and basically no limit on what state legislatures could do to undermine the right to vote of those people they don't want to vote.
There's a name for that too. That's one of those doctrines that doesn't need a text. And
We
it's
don't
called
talk about that. It's a radical theory.
independent state legislature doctrine. And the notion is, and this is just appalling, it's just amazing that it's even out there, even in presidential elections, the legislature, if it doesn't want to have the people vote for the president, they don't have to. And there is, Lord knows, a need for electoral college reform. But in the current bipartisan bill, there's a poison pill that says if the legislature permits, if they permit the people to vote for president. So this is dire, I think. So what is to be done? We're getting comments about control of both the House and the Senate, as well as this impeachment comment. What is to be done?
Well, so what we are finding is that, and this is outside Moore v. Harper, state laws are actually more protective these days than federal voting rights in a lot of cases. And state citizens have joined together to pass citizen initiatives to fight for constitutional amendments to their state constitution to provide them these guaranteed voting rights. So getting involved in your local politics, whether that's in whatever format that is, but being engaged in the laws in your state that protect the right to vote, I think that is the next frontier. That's assuming that Moore v. Harper doesn't actually go the worst way possible. And as for Moore v. Harper, we're talking about how dangerous this theory is and how it really basically, is just eroding everything that American democracy is based on. And we want people to know that. We want to talk about it. We want people to understand what this court is doing, and what we need to do to stop him.
What happens to the country is the big question if voting rights start just disappearing.
I mean, that is, I think when you look to the history of America, when you look to the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the Great Unrest, was because people were not being represented. Their voices were not being heard. And so, um, you know, I'm I am somebody who's never going to give up on America, and we're going to keep fighting. But there's definitely we're definitely on very shaky ground.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So now that we've had all that cheerful stuff, we're going to get to Jay Fidel, who is behind all this, but not behind many things that are happening in the world. He's on top of them. So Jay, you're going to talk about the insurrection, and maybe that's where this last discussion went. Well, we got to march on the Capitol and take it over if necessary. Isn't that kind of in the wind? What do you say, Jay?
Yeah, Avi, thanks. And thanks to the panelists for examining all those issues. But I think the biggest issue is, of course, the insurrection, because the insurrection represents more than what happened on January 6th. It's a state of mind. I liken it to a bicycle frame. If the bicycle frame doesn't work, and that's the basic framework of the country, the social compact, if you will, then it doesn't matter what the components are. It doesn't matter what kind of gears you have on the bicycle. You've got to have a frame. And our frame is damaged and declining. My first phenomenon I like to discuss is what I call the subtraction phenomenon. If you subtract the presidency and his acolytes, I mean, the Trump presidency and his acolytes, what happens? In other words, if I go down there with some of you guys and my friends, and maybe some weapons, and I break into the Capitol, and I try to disrupt, a national voting process, what happens to me? You think I can walk out again? You think I won't be arrested? You think I won't be thrown in the clink? You think I won't be indicted, prosecuted, found guilty and punished? For sure. So none of you guys need to come with me that day. But if I did do that, you can imagine. So what's the difference between me and President Trump, former President Trump, and his acolytes? Well, they got a plan. They got a conspiracy that's nationwide, and it's Trump's playbook, which I believe he got out of Putin's playbook, which was written up by Ann Applebaum in the Atlantic a couple of years ago, point for point, about how you do this playbook. It takes a lot of work to do a playbook like that, and it's still happening. He has a counterattack playbook. He sets up his thing as deniable. He sets up loyalty markers, reward and punishment systems. He calls in the loyalty markers. He makes lies and conspiracy theories and supports them. He does psychological projection, if you know about that. He does denial. He does double downs. He does distractions and victimization, poor bugger. He does threats and intimidation. He punishes those who are not loyal. He tries really hard to control the media and manipulate it. Don't forget the bad boy Bonnie and Clyde folk hero thing, which works deep in American culture. This has worked for him all his life in Queens. I grew up in Queens, and in real estate, in litigation, in politics. It's a great playbook. He squeezed out of 2 impeachments. He killed the Southern District of New York criminal case. That's another discussion. There are no indictments yet, and it's getting close to November. And in November, things may change drastically in his favor. You got to give him credit. He's the egg, or maybe the chicken. Okay, my second phenomenon is what I call the infection phenomenon. So Trump built his base out of disaffected people. And we find there are tens of millions of them in this country. The country isn't working that well. It hasn't been working that well. So we saw COVID grow to a pandemic under Trump. And he seemed to be looking for the chaos he found for us. History shows that autocrats foment chaos to enhance their power. Again, what happened in Germany, what happened in Russia, and the Ann Applebaum article. Isn't it that Trump's base all agree on these issues? No, they don't. Just the issues here today: abortion, guns, climate change, voting rights, and generally the rule of law, the Constitution, representative government, to democracy. Do you think they all agree on those things? Do you think the people, the thousands of people who showed up on January 6th and did their insurrection agree on that? No. What their bottom line is, they have a lot of hatred, bigotry. They believe in violence, and they are disaffected. So what's happening here? It's the infection phenomenon. All you got to do is touch somebody on one issue, and then you bring them in on all the issues. If you want to play the scapegoat technique, scapegoat a minority, no problem. And then you bring them in on all the issues we have discussed. And what you need for that is a charismatic demagogue who seeks power, who brings them in for one thing, and it infects everything. So if you ask those people on January 6th how they felt, they would say, oh, yeah, I agree with Trump on everything. But in fact, they're there for Trump. So many of them said, I'm here for him. And it didn't matter what the issue. They could never defend his position on those issues. So I think an example is abortion. You get religion supports somebody who is anti-abortion. Good example is the Latinos. They have religion, and they get in on religion, and they get on abortion. And now all these other things fall into place. Before you know it, they're into guns, ignoring climate change, undermining vote. It spreads, it infects. The gun lobby, there's a network of lobbying going on here. And that lobby affects not only guns, it's connected, it's a network, one big happy family of issues. Immigration, make them proud of succeeding more than their prior generations of immigrants. It's a natural social phenomenon, almost like the Stockholm phenomenon. And guns are for people with phallic problems. I don't want to discuss that in great detail here today, but they have unsatisfied lives. They need empowerment, and therefore guns. So if you like guns, then you like the other issues too. Climate change, they deny science. That's what they're doing, if they know what they're doing at all. And there's a huge cultural strain in America against science. We did a movie about that last year and found that the scientists were very isolated because they felt that the public did not believe in the science. And Trump capitalized on that in the COVID experience. So voting rights, it's the same thing. And immigrants, you have deniers, you have racists, you have people who believe that the country hasn't treated them very well. Let's go after the less advantaged. Let's go after the ones on the outside. And for this infection process, you actually probably do better with a cult figure. A cult figure is a charismatic leader, demands loyalty, and cultivates that loyalty with rewards and punishments. I remember the Comey Rule, that movie. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it. And you should look for this fantastic moment where Trump brought him in for a dinner in the White House and tried to completely corrupt Comey on loyalty. So loyalty is the bottom line. And then, of course, there's a thing about we do this because we can, because we are together. We've never had the experience of being together so much, and now we are together. We prove something that way. My next phenomenon is the morphing theory, which is very close to chicken and egg. And the general rule there is you only have to burn the Reichstag once. You don't have to burn it twice. And the burning of the Reichstag in 1933 gave Hitler a path to power. He got away with it. He denied it, but we know it's him. So did the January 6th insurrection fail? It seemed to fail that day. We were all gratified that they all went home, and Congress stayed until wee hours and actually passed the ballots. But in fact, I submit to you that it was a successful insurrection. One, because it brought people together. It brought the various people on the various issues together. Two, because it made a community out of them. We all heard that at the time through social media and otherwise. So this is likely to happen again, but I submit not in the same form. There will not be another attack on the Capitol. There will be something else. It's not limited to Washington. It could be elsewhere. It could be across the country. It doesn't necessarily have to be violent, at least at first, although the proxy dog whistle still calls a lot of people. Just like the possibility of nuclear war in Europe sticks with us, the proxy call for violence, is there. You raise the specter, the fear, and it sticks. The conspiracy is still happening. It continues to burn democracy every day. You've all talked about that. We got crazy election laws. We got raising money with my favorite case, Citizens United, my very favorite one, making all this possible with these ridiculous entertainment rallies, better than television, intimidating poll workers and officials, lying, preparing for election day, 24/7 election day, now 39 days away and counting. And the leader really is still Trump, still the same system, the same infection, the same lies, the same cult, the same loyalty, the same rewards and punishment, and the same ability to raise money. It's all there. The new insurrection has a legal imprimatur, however, not a bunch of rowdies with weapons. It's built on something else. It's built on hate and divisiveness. But that doesn't make it less than an insurrection, or, as some people call it, a civil war. We're still in it, and it may pop up in ways that surprise us. They're not going to tell us exactly what their plan is. Okay, the signals are clear. Our form of government is changing, like it or not. He has unloosed a bunch of destructive things. He has achieved a certain level of legal chaos. We have bad judges. We have, abortion issues. We have this incredible, ridiculous fight over the documents at Mar-a-Lago, classified documents involving nuclear secrets, and we have questions about it. And we have a judge who's not sure about which end is up, and talk about impeachment. No kidding. Remember, the true administration of justice is the firmest pillar of good government. Who said that? George Washington, and is on the building at the New York Supreme Court on Foley Square, and it's still very important. But we don't have it anymore. We have racism. We've always had racism. Even the founders had racism. They had slavery. After Charlottesville, it really came out. We have divisiveness. We saw that in COVID. How can you have a divided country on saving your own life? Give me a break. That's completely irrational. It's insane. It's madness. And yet we have it. And we have loss of rights, our own rights. We're willing to, deprecate, degrade our own rights, voting rights. You're absolutely right, Sylvia. So Shakespeare said, the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers. But see, Putin, he understands better. Now it's about undermining the media. And Trump has been doing that. And the media has effectively been undermined. So there's more to come, lots more to come. Loss of civil rights, especially the First Amendment, human rights. It's going to affect us all, not just the people who lose the rights. Although I have to say, I believe that the 1% rule is going to be played out in much greater detail, much greater distinction as we go forward. If they take Congress, and I think they will in November, we're going to see the wealth divide increase. Forget about adherence to the rule of law, the Constitution, the social safety net, civil and human rights. We lost the Supreme Court. We lost a lot, maybe not all, but we lost a lot of judges in the federal system. A GOP Congress is going to make life different for us. We'll have corruption. We'll have pardons for loyalists. We'll have, as I said, the wealth divide. See the movie Elysium, which talks about that. I think it's on Prime. Our foreign policy and reputation will change, and that will cost us in many indirect ways. So I'm taking this out of a couple of movies and statements I've heard on media. They're only a bunch of clowns. On the other hand, the quote is, yeah, people laugh at them, but only out of nervousness. Because who's a clown today is an autocrat tomorrow. We assume our beloved system will be resilient. They did in Europe too. The middle class did not think Hitler or Mussolini were serious. They thought these guys were clowns, and they thought they were pathetic. They weren't pathetic. Think of Ken Burns in the series that just came on PBS, The U.S. and the Holocaust. It's not so much about the Holocaust. It's about the U.S. It's about thinking these guys in Europe were not serious, but they were. Think of the movie called The Garden of the Finzi Contini in Ferrara, Italy, in the early 40s. They didn't think it was serious, and one day they were all taken away, still believing that they were exempt. They were not. We humor ourselves with hopeful points of light. Everybody talks about these points of light. You can see them on MSNBC every day, but that's not enough, and it's not soon enough. If Trump gets impeached or investigated or loses emotion or says something outrageous, that's not enough. His acolytes are deadly serious, even from Yale and Harvard, Avi. I want to tell you that, even from the best schools in the country, and they're not enough. I mean, well, they're worse than not enough. If he gets impeached or investigated or loses emotion, something outrageous, it doesn't bother him. He's unreachable. So his acolytes are working hard, investing tons of money and time for the long term. They have a plan. They're not telling us about it. If the GOP sees the inflection point coming at us, they know how high the stakes are. They have a plan. They conspire without conscience. They don't tell us about the plan, just like the autocrats in the 30s. Trump and the GOP have already destroyed some of their own. And some say they've destroyed the GOP itself. It's not the same. We lull ourselves while they conspire. We are so thoughtful, so reasonable. We are the Marquess of Queensberry. But one day, maybe soon, the curtain will come down and we will get this incredible sting a la Paul Newman and Jackie Gleason. And maybe it won't be never again. It'll be again. I want to leave you with this little quote, okay? Little quote. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty together again. Yes, it's about an anthropomorphic egg, as in chicken and egg. It's a nursery rhyme by Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, which is where we are today. Thank you, Albie.
Well, another son of Queens. but some think of him as an egghead, but no, you just saw quite the opposite. So we have some, thank you, Jay. And I guess a rallying cry, and not exactly ending this portion on an upbeat note, but there are other things to be said and other questions to be asked and responded to, and we have some time for that. So please, this is really the period when those who have tuned in have a chance to ask their questions. And we have some time for that and some questions already asked. I don't know if any of the panelists want to respond to what Jay had to say. Anyone want to celebrate the fact that Michael Pence and Dan Quayle saved the country through their understanding of constitutional law? Anyway, anyone on any of the panelists want to say something?
I hope they disagree with me. I'm waiting for the disagreement.
Richard, please.
I thought I was I was going over the top today and letting my frustrations out, but Jay has opened the door. And we've heard his frustrations. The only thing I would push back on a little bit there, Jay, is that as you and I have talked about before, how we talk about things matter. This is why having an independent media is so important. And I just wonder if characterizing any of these issues as a sort of political divide, or even allowing us to fall into the trap of characterizing it as some sort of culture war, I wonder if that's counterproductive. I've got friends who are politically conservative and friends who are deeply religious in ways that I'm not. They see these issues differently than me. But you know what? We don't disagree about fundamental things like the right of, the need to protect future generations, the desire to make sure my son doesn't, have to experience the horror of a school shooting. These are things we agree about. And so I just don't know. I don't understand I don't know how I'm supposed to think about this, right? Is there a political divide? Is there a culture divide? Or is that completely made up?
At the end of the day, Richard, it's a rights divide and maybe a wealth divide. Because I think what's going to happen is we're going to lose our rights little by little. We've already lost our rights. Think about choice. Think about voting rights. Think about the rights to be safe. You look at it, Chris, as a matter of gun violence prevention. But in fact, what about my right to be safe? I don't feel as safe as I used to feel. How about you guys? You feel as safe as you used to feel? That's my right. Also, a right to, personal security, to safety. So, I guess what I'm saying is that we will have a different country. It's not going to be the same. It's inexorable. It's happening in November and maybe more after that. And the question is, which of our rights will be taken away from us? And the answer is lots of them, and we better get used to it. We're going to be living in a different country and world. And maybe you and your friend will still be friends, except he or she will prevail.
I'd like to push back a little bit with Jay when you say that we don't know what they're planning. I think they've telegraphed their plans quite well. 2020 was sort of the beginning, and as you said, next time it's not going to be with guns. It's going to be through legal means, and that's why I do think the Electoral Count Act reform is so important because it does cut off one of the avenues. That's not saying it cuts off all avenues, because there are plenty of ways to go about undermining democracy. But I think that really does, that is going to be very, very helpful in protecting us going forward to cut off one of the avenues that the right has telegraphed that they are going for.
I agree. They've telegraphed a lot. We know a lot, but we don't know everything. And one of the very interesting points, which I was unaware of in the Ken Burns movie on PBS, was that Hitler's final solution was not known to the public. He didn't talk about it. So, yes, we know a lot, but there's other things, I believe, and we'll see, it'll all unfold in time, that they have in mind, which are too shocking. It's like those various candidates around the country that walk back their positions because they think GOP candidates that walk back their positions because they think their positions won't be popular. And they're lying because we know from what they said early on what their positions are. So I think the GOP has other things up its sleeve that they're not going to talk about, but they are planning. Sorry.
So one of the questions that's come in, and it gets to a theme, a thread that really does connect all of the panelists' talks, is does the fact that we have federalism and we have so many rules and they're different state by state and so on, doesn't this lead to confusion and ultimately apathy? So what about that? Some people think federalism and state constitutions are part of a solution to some of these problems. State judges may be different, but here's a point about whether, in fact, it may exacerbate rather than respond.
Are you asking me?
No.
Oh.
Heavens no, Jay. I'm asking the other panelists.
Well, I can say in regard to voting rights that that's absolutely true. We do know that the various laws, state by state, cause immense amounts of confusion, especially as social media, expands and really takes over our lives. If you are tweeting about voting by mail in Hawaii because you guys have a great vote by mail system, somebody in Indiana is thinking, "Oh, am I going to get my ballot in the mail?" Nope, they're not, because it's so unbelievably confusing. And I get that question a lot. Actually, when I speak to anybody from another country, I have to explain to them. Actually, no, everybody doesn't vote the same. It's completely different in every different country or every different state. And so I do agree that I think it causes a lot of confusion, and that does lead to apathy.
Chris, Kimi, Richard?
I mean, we rely a lot on state level laws that have patched loopholes to keep people safe. Where I see the apathy, and I don't know if this really answers the question or not, but there is a place where apathy exists, and it's actually in states that have great gun laws, like Hawaii, right? So if you live here right now and you are a gun rights person and really pushing for gun rights advocacy, and you're in line to get one of these concealed carry permits, right? And you're going to be really vocal about it. We actually saw it last session in the legislature when someone in the House who was a Democrat proposed clawing back some of our self-defense laws that said that you don't have to feel that your life is at danger to kill somebody who's potentially attacking you, right? You can actually just, if they're attacking you, kill them, even if you don't think their life's in danger, which wasn't really a gun thing because people weren't carrying guns. So it was like a stabbing law. But now that people are going to be carrying guns, it becomes a shoot first law. So people are allowed to shoot first. And you saw this vocal minority of people who are pro-gun rights, and a very, very, very small minority who are getting legislators to propose these laws that would help them carry their guns around and injure people and harm people with them. The apathy comes in on the other side. This vast majority of people who live in a bubble, right, on an island that has no guns and great gun laws and is safe. And so it's hard to mobilize those people to stand up and to speak up for protecting those laws that are in place. And maybe the same thing exists with voting too. Like we sometimes take for granted, the right to vote. And so, how are you going to stand up to protect that when it feels like it's the norm? It's the standard procedure. And so that's the fight we're fighting right now. And hopefully, obviously, some people in the audience will be motivated by that desire to not be apathetic towards the safe place in which we live right now vis-a-vis guns.
Can I step in on that, Avi?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. This is an example of my infection phenomenon. Hawaii has been infected with the national GOP initiative to reduce gun laws. I have lived here for, almost 60 years, and I never saw gun control, gun laws, gun violence prevention as a serious issue that the legislature should take up. All of a sudden, right now, we have this issue going on in the legislature. And frankly, a lot of legislators don't even realize, but there's lobbying money coming in, there's lobbyists coming in, and all of a sudden, we're infected with a national issue. What happened to us?
Kimi, we were first in the country to have abortion permitted. Where are we now?
I was actually going to say something very, very similar to you, Chris. Is that the states that we see the most apathy in are the states that have the highest patient access, because they're thinking, well, it's not going to happen to me, it doesn't affect me. And to tag onto what Jay just said, and Avi, I will get to your question, I'm sorry, but to tag onto what Jay just said, if the Senate or if Congress passes a national ban, it will affect you. It will affect every single woman in every single state in the country. And what I want people to realize, and yeah, you're right, it gives rise to apathy when things are good at home. It also gives rise to apathy, which I think Sylvia was getting at, when there's just mass confusion. You're just like, you know what, screw it, I'm one person. I can't do anything. And that isn't true. I mean, if there's anything good in this issue getting picked, specifically with abortion, getting kicked back to the states, is that the vast majority of Americans do not want it. Even conservatives think it goes too far. So if you live in a blue state where access is good, donate your time and money to other states where it's not, because it's going to the ballot box. It's on the ticket in November. And you have the opportunity to funnel money into those states, just like anti-choice people are funneling money into our states. So you have the chance to change this. Like that's what I say to people who say, well, I can't make any difference. It's like, no, well, with that attitude, you definitely can. But you can. Like if they want to return the power to the people, which I don't think they do, obviously, since there are a number of states that put a legislative ban in place despite having a state population that didn't want it. But if they're going to put it back to the people, then the people need to stand up and say, okay, we don't want this. Take it back. And I'm sorry, Avi, what was your original question to me?
I want to give Richard a chance.
Thank you, Avi. And thanks to whoever in the audience asked this question. And you can see that we all want to talk about it. It's an illustration that's a good question. The question is going to, sort of fundamental issue about how we make decisions, how we govern ourselves. And so I'd like to just generally express the opinion that I'm not ready to abandon the idea of federalism, right? The idea of states being good places for policy experiments. In part, the reason I'm not ready to abandon it is based on the brilliant work of Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom, who looked at, where around the world are people effectively managing their resources. And the answer was, when smaller communities manage their resources, we tend to get better outcomes. And so I just believe in that. And I think that federalism is sort of, that concept on a larger scale. But where it's falling apart, where federalism isn't working, is in the inconsistency of when we're deciding which are federal issues and which are state issues, right? I think that's what we're challenging here. It's not the idea of having states; it's the idea of picking politically or theocratically or whatever, however you want to characterize it, picking when states get to make decisions. If there's any set of topics on which the federal government has a role, it's on these issues. And here's another thread for us through all of these different topics. It's when there's a threat to particular sort of underrepresented portions of our citizenry, right? Where you have injustices. That's where the federal government should be stepping in. And to see on these issues, the federal government stepping back and the judiciary in particular stepping back, I think that is unforgivable. And perhaps that, that says that our federalism doctrine could be scrapped, but maybe not the federalism idea as a whole.
We are at the point where we're going to ask each of the panelists to have a couple of minutes to summarize or to add to what you've already said. And then we will have just a little bit of time left, perhaps for responses, but 2 minutes, please, each of you. And I guess we should maybe go in the same order we started, if that's all right, Kimi.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank all of you. This has been a lot of fun. You guys are all a lot of fun to interplay with. And just to allude to what I was just saying is that, I want people to stop and think about this issue and realize that it's not a theoretical issue. This is a debate and a conversation that affects real people. This is 10-year-old rape victims. These are women wanting families but have an ectopic pregnancy. These are women just starting their lives who aren't ready to put aside everything to be a mother, and no one should be forced into a role that they're not ready for. And so take a step back and think, okay, even if I don't personally believe in this, does that give me the right to tell somebody how to live their life? And I hope people, when it goes to the ballot box in November, and in the future, they take a second and realize that the way that I feel about something doesn't give me the right to control how other people run, how other people live. And so just my final push is, if you are in Hawaii, please, please, please do your best to donate time and money to other states that need help, because the only way we're going to get out of this is by working together. So that's my final take.
Thank you. Chris?
I'll just touch on something that I typically talk about in my work and haven't touched on yet today, which is the role that me as a veteran, the role that I play as a veteran, and many veterans play in the gun violence prevention movement. But really the way that people can think about guns in our society, the way we think about them in the military. And what we often say is that, of course, veterans are great messengers for talking about guns. We come from a profession of arms. We're trusted and respected for our service. But more than that, that the military actually has this gun culture that is based on training, safety, and accountability, right? So our profession of arms has established that we need training, safety, and accountability in the rules and regulations that exist inside the military to protect the force and to have a high functioning gun culture in that profession of arms. Our society, our culture doesn't have those things for the most part. In most states, there's no training, no safety and accountability in our gun laws. And that's where we should look. We should look to the people who kind of know about guns and use them professionally to determine how we think about that. And if you're a gun owner, think about that safety aspect, the accountability part of it. And if you're somebody who's not a gun owner, or you're someone who lives in a state like Hawaii where you don't think that these things affect you, I hope I've gotten across that they do, starting now, like right now. And if you're anywhere in the country and want to step up and be a part of the gun violence prevention movement, join your local chapter of Moms Demand Action, largest gun violence prevention organization in the country, chapters in every state, all over the place. And if you're here in Hawaii, especially if you're on Oahu, chime in on some of the things that are happening right here and right now, and tell the mayor and the police chief that you support the role they're taking in keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people. One more time with the email address. So there's a little self-promotion, but it's hpdltc@honolulu.gov. Send an email right now. Say, we support the concealed carry regulations.
Yes, Richard.
Thank you all for working on such incredibly important issues. And thanks for teaching me. And thanks to you, Avi, for organizing this, slightly rancorous panel. So I'm stuck on the chicken and the egg question, and I've been trying to figure out different ways to squish that analogy into what we're talking about. And so I've got one to close with. It seems to me that when a chicken lays an egg, and that egg then hatches, you get another chicken. You don't get an albatross or a nene or some other type of bird. And I'm just feeling like we need a rule of law. We need to remind ourselves that the rule of law is no less consistent than those biological rules. And that's all. That's where all I want to close with and say that what I'm seeing across the entire spectrum of the issues here is a set of rules, whether they're legal rules or maybe sometimes even our own personal philosophies, where we're not really challenging ourselves to be consistent in how we view these things. And I think intellectual honesty demands it. And so I'm going to do more of that, and I want to encourage everybody else to do it, no matter what side of the political fence you might sit on.
Thank you. We'll leave the omelets out of here and how you make them. Sylvia, please.
Thanks so much. I think what really stood out to me here is the interconnection between all of our different issues. On the surface, you might ask, what does abortion rights have to do with the environmental movement? And what does either of those have to do with insurrection? But the reality is that we are all connected. All of the work that we do, all of um, everything that we do really is connected through our democratic principles and our rule of law. And so it's so important to look beyond that one issue or one thing that really motivates you, um, like personally, and look to how you can get engaged and involved in all of the other things out there that are so interconnected, because what happens in one area is going to hurt you in another as well. So
Thank you. And Jay, we have someone who is more optimistic than you. I won't reveal his name because he says you're a mensch. But Jay,
I have an optimistic takeaway, if you will. If anybody's familiar with the Japanese culture, there's something called nakodo. Nakodo is the restatement of marital vows. And after the time of marriage, a lot of couples in Japan, and some right here, some members of my wife's family have had nakodo ceremonies. The fact is, we haven't paid attention to social studies. And I think one thing we could do is a clockwork orange technique on social studies. Make all the kids in school. You don't seem like you know about Clockwork Orange. Make them study social study. But it's more than that. It's time for a restatement of vows, to the Constitution, the rule of law, the reestablishment of the social compact. You have to understand what it is before you can reestablish it and restate it. And essentially, it's the rule to take care of each other, to care about your neighbor, care about your country, care about the social fabric that we have. It's time to remarry the rule of law, the Constitution, the social compact. So that's not easy, and it's not quick, and we don't have the time or the support for that matter. But we need to do this. In fact, we have a domestic war, and while the domestic war is raging, the other issues raging, the other issues can't be resolved. All the ones we've talked about. We have to learn to like each other again, all of us, appreciate the humanity in the country, appreciate the liberal world order in the world. It'll take a profound and immediate change in the sensibilities of at least half the country. We're going to have to pay a high price to get to the end of this. It's more than just the stock market up and down. We have to get ready for the sweeping changes that will affect us. At the end of the day, the egg is not going to be the egg anymore. The chicken is going to be the egg, or the egg is going to be the chicken. I'm not sure which way it goes or where we are on the cycle, but we're on the cycle. Last night I saw a piece by Andy Borowitz, who's one of the funniest, smartest men alive. And he said, you really have to pay attention, and you can't get disgruntled about it. You have to spend the time thinking about what you can do, and you have to be in the public sphere, talking truth to power and so forth. So contrary to a popular rumor, ThinkTech is not opening an office in Vancouver, although we reserve the right to do so at a later time. Thank you very much, all.
thank you. And you like that comedian's yokes, I guess you could say. All right. So I am told that we now have a moment for the audience to take a quick 1-minute viewer poll. And I'm going to read the questions. I hope this is now geared up and ready to go to ask your views on some of the issues that we've talked about. We will summarize very briefly thereafter. First, should Congress pass nationwide legislation on abortion rights? Second, are we doing enough and doing it quickly enough to save the planet from climate change? 3, should there be a nationwide ban on assault weapons? 4, will the electorate have a free and fair election in November without additional federal legislation? 5, will additional legislation be necessary or helpful to prevent another insurrection? Thank you. Please fill those out quickly, and then we will have the results, I'm told. So let's take a look at those results. First one, 57% agree that Congress should pass nationwide legislation. I take it not everyone is talking about Lindsey Graham's nationwide legislation at the same time. Number 2, are we doing enough and doing it quickly enough to save the planet for climate change? 100%. No, we are not. Everyone disagrees with that. 100% agrees that we need a nationwide ban on assault weapons. On the 4th, the electorate in a free and fair election this November, 7% think we will, 57% think we won't, and 36% are unsure. And finally, will additional legislation be necessary or helpful to prevent another insurrection? 57% agree, 7% disagree, 36% are unsure. Thank you very much for participating in that. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you in particular for this terrific panel. We could and maybe should go on and on, so maybe we'll reserve or ask to reserve some more time in the future. There will be things to look at then, including that election. I take it one of the themes is get out and vote. This is important, and it's important on minor, well, seemingly minor issues and candidacies, as well as those that have obvious national implications. I think a theme is they all have national implications, and that's an important thing to recognize down ballot as well as at the top of the ballot. I don't know what the math is. It's nice that we just had some numbers, but it was striking to me that we had a threat multiplier, but we also had a subtraction phenomenon. And I think, in a way, it all adds up, and it all adds up to what was an exhilarating discussion. I hope those who got to see it enjoyed it. I think I'm pretty confident that the panelists did. And I want to say that these are important issues that are not going to go away. So I want to thank each of them again. Kimi Ide-Foster, Chris Marvin, Richard Walsgrove, Sylvia Albert, and of course, Jay, Uncle Jay, maybe a mensch after all, for pulling this together and for your comments, which were thoughtful and sometimes painful on these very controversial and vital topics. This has been a production of Think Tech Hawaii. It's being streamed to webinar registrants on Zoom and will be available on YouTube, Vimeo, and various other social media platforms. I hear about those. I don't know anything about them. And will be rebroadcast on Think Tech Hawaii and on Lelo 54. Mahalo for joining us today. See you again soon. Thank you all.